We're now joined by Captain John Cox. I want to lead into the interview, Captain, with this.
And the company concluded that off Australia was the best place to look. Just 4 days after the disappearance, the data was given to the Malaysians, suggesting those two massive arcs for searching, but also with the conclusion that all indications pointed to off Australia as the likely spot to find the plane. The Malaysians only shared the news of the arcs 3 days later.
The Prime Minister was briefed on the satellite information at 8 a.m. Saturday the 15th of March.
And it was 2 more days before Malaysia officially asked the U.S. and Australia to search the South Indian Ocean, a 5-day delay, while resources were used elsewhere.
All right, that's a report from ABC News, folks, and we're joined right now by Captain John Cox, president of Safety Operating Systems. It's an aviation security firm. He's also a veteran airline pilot, of course, a commercial, corporate, and general aviation pilot, and NBC aviation analyst. And Captain, welcome to the show, sir.
Thanks very much for having me.
Well, it's my pleasure. All right, so they came up empty today in the search for the plane off the coast of Australia in the Indian Ocean. Do you think they're going to find this plane eventually?
Yes, I'm actually quite confident that they will. If you look in history, we have always been able to find aircraft with passengers on board and determine the cause, both causal and contributory factors to the accident. So there's a debris field out there, floating out there, and I believe that we will find it. I'm a little amazed that we have not yet, but I do remain quite confident that in the end we will find this airplane.
There's a report out of Reuters that the people in Australia and the Deputy Prime Minister believe that the debris may have sunk by now. And of course, don't forget, as you know, these satellite images, when they were announced the other night, that had already been days earlier that the satellite images were taken. So is it possible or probable that A, that it's sunk already, or B, that it's in a different latitude and longitude, much different than it was when those images were taken?
It's certainly possible. When you have large pieces of debris, they will certainly move at a different rate than small pieces. The debris field that is probably going to end up being found is what I will call small debris, and that is things like seat cushions or even baggage that was in an overhead bin. Those things will float for quite a long time. And when we find that, then we can begin to localize the search, get an idea of the diameter and shape of the floating debris field. From there, we can utilize expertise in the maritime industry to take into account currents, wind, and waves, and that can help narrow the search on the bottom of the ocean for the main wreckage.
What's your timetable on this? I mean, I've heard reports today that this could take months.
Now, it's in an area that is not heavily traveled, so it's going, and it's quite a large search area, so it's going to take some time. I have been surprised that we haven't found it yet. I remain confident we will, but I don't know that anybody can give you an estimate time-wise of how long it's going to take. To put it simply, it's going to take as long as it takes.
Captain, but now you say you're surprised they haven't found it, and you say that they will find it. Are you convinced, and what has convinced you, if you are, that it crashed, that it's gone, as opposed to it landed somewhere?
Well, I think if you look at the area over which it flew, the vast majority of it's water. That's one thing. Secondarily, the airplane is very large, and it's over 200 feet long. It's over 200 feet wingspan. To put in perspective for you, it's 2/3 the length of a football field and wider than a football field. It's not something that you can easily hide. We've had reports, satellites, and other intelligence around the majority of the airports over which it could have flown, and there is a 777 sitting there. In addition, it would have to have overflown numerous countries' military radars, and that's unlikely as well. So when you put all that together, it seems to me the much higher likelihood is that it's in the water.
How would you account then for the disabling of the communications, as opposed to if there was a plane in trouble? Why wouldn't the pilots communicate with the tower or with somebody and send out a mayday?
Well, that's a good question. The failure or inability of the crew to communicate is one of the central questions in this mystery. We do know this. We do know that one of the communications devices that transmits the airplane's position to the radar, known as a transponder, ceased to operate. We don't know if that was an interruption of electrical power, a failure of the component, or if it was switched off. There's another device known as ACARS that's a data link system that quit sending data but could stop talking to the network, and that says it has electrical power and that the component was functioning. To stop the data was a deliberate act by a knowledgeable person. Who that person was, we don't know. But that leads to believe that the airplane had electrical power. It also flew for over 6 hours, and it flew what appears to be a pre-programmed route from a point in space known as to another point in space, to another point in space. So it made several turns that are consistent with the utilization of the flight management computer. Again, it requires a very specialized amount of knowledge to program that flight management.
All right, so your hypothesis doesn't rule out. In fact, sounds like it encourages the fact that it could have been, and probably was, there was something nefarious going on here that went awry. You know, that landed them in the ocean. Correct?
I would only say that it appears that somebody with knowledge interacted with the computer systems. Beyond that, we don't have evidence to draw a conclusion. So, in my view, everything's still on the table.
What do you think for some of the coverage? I mean, I know you work for NBC. You may not want to criticize CNN in particular, but they are literally 24 hours, wall to wall, almost nothing else but this plane. Breaking news: the pilot made a cell phone call before they took off. And they're even asking their panel of experts, is that unusual? And the panel's saying, no. I mean, every little, I'm sure the pilot went to the men's room before they took off as well. Do you think the coverage in some respects on some networks, I'll phrase it that way, is overdone?
Oh, sure. I think that there has been a full-blown media frenzy on particularly some of the media outlets, both print and electronic. And I've tried to be very cautious and encourage everyone to be the same. Do not overrun the evidence that we have. And what evidence we have is very limited. So the hardest thing for everyone right now is to be patient and let these very professional search organizations do their job. And when they find the debris field, then the recovery phase begins. And once we've that, then the accident investigation can begin in earnest.
I'll give you one more. You've been very generous. I know you're on a train as we speak, sir. You seem very confident that based on the satellite photos and imagery, we will find a debris field, and it could turn out to be that plane. Why are you so confident when even, I know it's a huge piece, 75 feet in length or width, and scattered debris, but they say that cargo ships dump stuff all the time that can be that big. And if it turns out that it's not, they get there and it's not that from the plane, the remnants are not from the plane, the pieces are not from the plane, and we're at square one, would you still feel and still believe that it one day will be found?
Well, my confidence is that we will find the debris field. Now, whether these large items are part of it or not, it's an entirely different matter. But I believe, based on everything that we have done in the past, that we will find floating debris. If this particular large items turn out not to be part of it, that's fine. We'll continue the search. The commitment of 26 nations is virtually unparalleled, focused on a single effort to find this airplane, and I believe that we will.
Captain, a pleasure talking to you, sir. Thank you so much for accommodating us.
My pleasure.
Take care. Captain John Cox, ladies and gentlemen, president of Safety Operating Systems, an aviation security firm, career pilot, commercial, corporate, general aviation, and NBC aviation analyst. We're honored to have had him on. Very interesting. Very interesting. He's confident it'll be found. He's pretty confident. There's no way it could have touched down on land. And whether or not it's this satellite photo that will lead them to the debris field, he's confident the debris field is somewhere and it will be found. And when asked how long it might take, it'll take as long as it takes. And when we need to be patient. Very interesting. And he's a guy who has knowledge that I certainly do not pretend to have. But when we come back, the panel. Now, the panel has a lot of knowledge, that I could tell you, and they're coming up on the Steve Malzberg Show on Newsmax Television.
The Steve Malzberg Show.